Well, we only have a couple of weeks before Advent starts, and the readings at the end of our liturgical year kind of invite us, well, no, they really force us to consider what many call the end times, or the parousia, that second coming of Christ. That's a fun topic to preach on, isn't it? Well, just prior to this part of Mark's Gospel, in this story today, the disciples were asking Jesus. They said, what's coming? What's going to be happening? And what are the signs that we should look for? So he takes a seat on the Mount of Olives, and he begins a long explanation of which today's reading is a part. And historically, this is right before his passion and death. So he's preparing some very special messages and final instructions, if you will. Jesus even quotes the book of Daniel that we heard part of in our first reading, and he's teaching them about the Son of Man coming again. And he's teaching them that in a very real way, the whole Jewish faith and all of salvation history has a focal point in him, the person of Jesus Christ. You know, these messages are hard for us because our human limitations, and sometimes I think we just lack a sense of imagination. And that can get in our way of really seeing what the messages are. Let's try and imagine that we're hearing this thing for the first time. And let's try to see that we're looking at what Jesus is telling us and Daniel is telling us and even Revelations, not so much as a predictor of when things are going to happen. Because as Jesus tells us, only the Father knows. It all will be done in God's time. So why should we waste our time? You know, I think all of us have enough life experiences to know that when we try to figure out things on our time and superimpose that on God's time, he always wins. And his time is always in our best interest. So let's not try to peg when this is going to happen. But let's rely on our imagination and see what his message is telling us. I think I remember as a child hearing these readings, and the first part sounds real scary and foreboding. It says darkness. The sun and the moon are going to go black. The stars will fall out of the heavens. All of these things give us a pause to be fearful, to be apprehensive, and to get anxious. But here's the thing. We start to extrapolate too far in that direction and think of these end times as something horrible. But let's imagine that Jesus is simply telling us this. Everything in this time will be flipped. It'll be turned upside down. It'll be something that goes topsy-turvy. And that's a little simpler because I think we can all agree, if we look at what's going on in our world today, there's a lot we'd like to see flipped and turned around and go topsy-turvy. All too often society teaches us that abortion is okay because it's just another form of contraception. Society teaches us that marriage may not be between a man and a woman. It can be whoever wants to get married. Society loses a dignity for male and female. And the list can go on and on and on. And if those things were flipped, wouldn't we all be happy? And it often feels like the world is winning that battle. That those values seem more prevalent and more important than the ones we hold dear to our hearts. Don't we all try to live our spiritual life and these faith values, and we know we're countercultural to the world? Well, the second coming of Christ, all of that ends. The good finally wins. And there will be a new heaven and a new earth. Isn't that right? That's what we're taught. That's what we're supposed to believe, not be fearful. See, when he tells us that Jesus tells us he'll be coming in great power and glory, his love, his mercy, and his kindness, all of those virtues about our faith, they win. That's great. That's good news. The fig tree is our example. It'll become tender and sprout leaves. The growth of God's plan will become a permanent reality. Our task is always to try to keep ourselves countercultural to the world, moving and trying to pull ourselves and everyone around us in that direction. It's kind of like we're pulling the world away from that brink and trying to bring it back to God's values. And what do? We rely on God's divine providence to know where to go. We rely on God's grace to give us the strength for that journey so that we can live our lives in concert with Jesus. With the parousia, that's fancy word for the second coming, the struggle is over. It ends. Won't that be great? Well, using my imagination again, I was trying to think of a way that makes this less scary. And it occurred to me that maybe we can look at it as if we all live in this world in a big bowl. You know what a colander is, with all the holes in it, with the screens? And we're all living in that bowl right now. And it's like the netting or the sieve on the bottom of it. A sieve is defined as a device that separates wanted elements from unwanted material. So, if we're all living in this big bowl of the earth with the sieve in it, maybe Jesus is the one that shakes it up and turns things upside down and makes it go topsy-turvy. And what happens? He'll separate the wanted from the unwanted. The victory will be for the virtuous that practice the life of love of God, love of neighbor, kindness and mercy, purity and forgiveness, gentleness, peace, joy, and righteousness. All of those wanted virtues are going to stay. They win out. The rest, all that junk, the unwanted, passes through and it's gone forever. Now, on a human level, this is upsetting because it upsets our lifestyle, it upsets our life. But spiritually, it's a victory, isn't it? See, Jesus tells us very vividly that the heavens and the earth will pass away, but His Word will not. Jesus Himself is the Word made flesh, right? None of His teachings will pass away. He will be what is wanted and what is left and standing in the end. And you know what? It's not really an end, is it? Why should we call it end times? Just beginning times, just beginning of that final victory. Let's look upon it as a new life, a new beginning. And we're all invited to pray for the guidance and the wisdom, to be alert and live these values out in our lives, those wanted values that we want to stay. And they will remain in the sieve. Then we can share in and be a part of this great victory. We're all being prepared in a profound way. As I said, Advent's coming, when we're all going to be sitting here saying, "Come, Lord Jesus." With faith and a little imagination, we can really mean it.